Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Open Mic Podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm a rising senior at Columbia University, and I'm so excited to be hosting this series where we'll be talking about school and life and everything in between. Each episode will feature a new topic and a different guest, and today I'm so excited to be introducing my good friend, Kristian Woerner. Kristian, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. Super excited to talk about architecture. My name's Kristian Woerner. I'm originally class of 21, but now class of 22, architecture student at Columbia in Columbia College. And yeah, happy to share about my experience.
Yeah, I think it's so cool that we're technically in the same class year now, because Kristian was my OL when I was in NSOP, so like the new student orientation program. And that's how we met, which was like 3 years ago. It was 3 years ago?
Yeah, a long time ago now. I think I was a sophomore and you were a freshman.
Yeah.
And now we'll graduate together. I'm still getting used to it, but yes, very excited.
Yeah. And so that means that you took a gap year this past year, right?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Took a lot of, back and forth deciding whether I wanted to take a gap year or not. But ultimately, I decided to take the year off and kind of let things simmer back to normal. I didn't want to do my final year of architecture remotely. I really like the vibe of being in studio and working hands-on and collaborating with other people in the space. And so wanted to take the year off, let that settle down, get some work experience under my belt, and then come back with full gusto this year. So
that's awesome.
Excited to come back.
Yeah. And before we dive into your architecture major, what work experience did you do over the gap year?
Yeah, I think I started with big hopes and dreams of traveling and working abroad and was very close to that. But, COVID put a monkey wrench in things. So worked a couple part-time jobs here and there, now doing some graphic design stuff for a startup, and really have spent a lot of time working on my own creative projects, which has been really nice, spending time with family and now spending time with friends in the city, not having school and homework to do. So lots more time to explore.
Right before this, so I was like doing some research on your previous art/architecture. And when we met, I knew you were an architecture major because you told us that, but I didn't know you had an art background before that, right? Was it like more like visual arts and painting? So
Yeah.
So how did that interest develop?
I mean, it'll sound cliche, but I've been an artist since I was born. I've always been painting and drawing. When I applied to college, I wanted to study visual arts. But I think once I got to college, I realized that I felt so constrained and kind of stuck in self-criticism of my art. And I had worked in an art gallery for many years. So my art background had also been influenced about what sells and what doesn't sell. And I think in that way, I kind of felt stuck and needed a refresh, needed something different. And then I fell into architecture as a creative outlet, and it turned out to be the best thing. So very happy I made the switch. Unfortunately, I can't talk about any of the visual arts studios on campus because I didn't take any. I switched straight to architecture, but very happy that I made that transition. And I found that I've been able to channel my artistic vision and my just passion for visual arts through the architecture department, which has been really exciting.
Did you know that you wanted to come to New York specifically for college?
Yeah, I'm from California, from the Bay Area, and I definitely knew I wanted to move far away, experience something different. And so definitely knew I wanted to hop across the coast, come to the East Coast. And I had never been to New York until I visited, Columbia, NYU, some of the other schools here, and just fell in love with the city. And that's when I knew, I wanted to come to New York. I guess my Columbia experience, or the application process, was kind of unconventional. I forgot to apply, and then never thought I'd get in, and here I am, and very happy that I ended up here.
Because you were planning on doing like visual arts, and you weren't thinking about architecture at all, right? Like when you applied?
It was kind of in the back of my head. I had taken a couple landscape architecture classes at our local community college back home and really enjoyed those. But I knew that I didn't have to study architecture in undergrad to pursue landscape architecture graduate school, which was kind of the plan. And so I was going to continue doing visual arts and maybe sustainable development or environmental studies on the side. and then eventually maybe look into landscape architecture. I think before coming to Columbia, I thought architecture was just rigid buildings, skyscrapers, all about, square footage and bathrooms. And after, a couple classes in the architecture department, I realized that's not it at all. And there's so much more to explore and appreciate. So, yeah.
How would you describe architecture in like 1 to 2 sentences if someone asked you now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I tell people all the time, I study the intersections of people and place. So thinking about the way that spaces influence human behavior and the way human behavior affects, spaces, environments, buildings. And so I think it's all about the interactions between people, and architecture and the built environment in general really kind of sets the scene for everything else that happens. And so that's what's really cool about studying architecture. It's made me look at the world differently.
Yeah, I love that. Because I think it was an art hum that I took this past fall where we were talking. It was like my first intro to art and architecture too.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I never thought of it as architecture influencing the way people move around and make sense of the space. It kind of was just like there, just like buildings are there before. And I never really thought about it that way. But it's like, oh, someone puts a door there, then I can exit the room. But if there's no door there, or they design it differently, then like the experience is completely different.
Yeah, exactly. And I think studying architecture has helped me realize that. And it's, it's more than just buildings and doors and interior spaces. It's sidewalks and it's windows, and it's, the way the trees line the street and the scaffolding on the street and all these things that you don't normally realize, they have a huge impact on the way people move around the city.
Mm-hmm. Talking about sidewalks. So I don't exactly remember this is correct, but I remember I was outside of 116th Gates, maybe like 2 years ago. And I think I saw you like walking around with like this mannequin. Was that you? Or maybe it was someone else.
Yes, that was probably me.
Was that for an art project?
It was not for an art project, nor any project, but I had a job at the scene shop. So building sets for theater at the graduate school. Oh. And they had a big pile of extra things, and I brought a mannequin home as party decor. And then it's made its way into a few different photo ops, few different set design projects. But yes, that would have been me walking down the street with a mannequin.
That is so funny. That was so fun. And what does a typical day in the life look like for you as an architecture student?
Yeah, I guess starts out with studio in the morning, 9 to 12. So 3-hour studio, which is great because you have time to really get into critiques and projects, and you have time to work. And so always studio in the morning, and then usually quick lunch, and then off to another class. I would say at this point, most of my classes relate to architecture, human-animal relationships, or the human identity in a different way. So some class related to that, and then either off to work or off to do nothing at all. There's no in between. Before dinner, have some dinner, and then come back and work on homework, do readings in the common area of my suite or lounge, and kind of discuss our readings with friends, and then go to bed. Although I'm an architecture student, all-nighters are a rarity, so I'm very proud of that.
Oh, nice. Is it usually very common for architecture students to pull all night?
Yeah, I think it's notorious, working 24 hours in the studio getting projects done, but I only had to do a couple of those the night before the final project is due, so I'm thankful for my sleep.
Gotcha. So what exactly do you do in architecture studio?
Yeah, so the architecture major is comprised of kind of a couple separate parts. The one is the architecture studio, and that's where you're actually building things, creating things, designing things. And then you also have the history theory classes and the seminars. And so in studio, that's where you're actually designing spaces, designing furniture, designing books. It's not always a building, but that's the space where you're going to be creating something, collaborating with other students and creating something, and getting feedback on your work. And that's my favorite part, of course, of studying architecture, is that the hands-on part of it.
I'm just thinking it's like very it's like half design and half engineering.
Well, normally, yes. Columbia's program is really cool in that it's really conceptual and theoretical and not so much structural, which may not be for everyone, but I absolutely love it. It means that I can be super creative and imaginative and think outside the box and not worry about the structural parts. So I don't have to worry about, where are the bathrooms and is this going to stand up? But that gives me so much more freedom to be creative and come up with new ideas. And then if I do eventually want to go into architecture as a career, I feel like I've learned how to be creative first and figure out the logistics second. And I think that just leads to much cooler projects than thinking about the logistics right off the bat and then trying to be creative from there. So yeah, I really like Columbia's architecture program for that reason.
Do you have any favorite architecture classes that you recommend?
Yeah, I've taken a lot of cool classes. In the history theory section, I took a class called Architectural Histories of Colonialism and Humanitarianism, which is definitely a mouthful, but it was really cool. We looked at architecture and the history of colonialism and refugee camps being built and kind of slave plantations and what the architecture means in those kinds of spaces. And it was really cool to think about architecture that way and think about it from a critical lens and kind of question, the canon of architecture and who we revere as these great architects and then who we don't consider architects and kind of switching that around and seeing which architects, which people, which cultures have been underrepresented in the architecture dialogue. So that was a really cool class. Modern Japanese architecture with Jonathan Reynolds was also very cool. He's kind of the expert on modern Japanese architecture. And that was my first class at Columbia where, that was the professor's study. He wrote the textbook and to, sit there in the classroom and watch him shed a tear about some of his favorite buildings is really inspiring. So that's one of the classes that really got me doing architecture in the first place.
Wow, that's so cool that you took the class with the person who wrote the book.
Yeah, it was cool. I highly, to anyone, and no matter what field you study, highly recommend looking into those professors because the class means so much more when, that's their baby, that's their brainchild. And it's just, it was really inspiring.
From classes, do you have architects that you look up to or whose style you really like?
Yeah. I get a lot of my inspiration from visual art still. So I have a lot of artists that inspire my architecture. And I don't know if I necessarily follow, specific architects, but I love the weird buildings, people pushing the box. I love Gaudi and his architecture in Barcelona. And, some of the cool new buildings in New York City that some people may think are ugly, I love, the Vessel and Little Island right off the coast just opened up. So yeah, I'm a big fan of people pushing the boundaries of what architecture could look like.
Does that mean that a lot of your homework, or maybe not homework, but research involves traveling around New York to look at new sculptures or pieces of architecture?
Yeah. That's one great thing about studying architecture in New York City. You have access to this huge spread. Of course, you don't have the historical monuments you might have in Europe or South America or Asia, but you do have a lot of contemporary architecture. And a lot of our projects are site specific. So we'll go to the site and take notes, take pictures, be immersed in the space, and then come back and design something for the space, which is really cool. We went on a field trip upstate and went kayaking as a class. And next year I'll be going to Phoenix and the Bay Area to do some research for the highest level design studio with the whole class. And we'll be interacting with different communities there. So yeah, it's cool. Lots of opportunities to travel around and get to know the space you're designing for.
You said that was the highest level design class. So that's kind of your senior thesis in a way. Is that right?
No.
Oh, okay.
Kind of. It's confusing. So there are 4 studios in the architecture major, plus an optional 5th. And once you're a senior, you can either take that optional fifth studio, design 3, we call it. You can write a thesis, or you can take a seminar class. And you have to do 2 of those basically.
Okay.
And so I'll be doing all 3. I'll write a thesis, I'll do the high level studio, and the senior seminar is required. So it's an option once you're a senior.
Oh, wow. That's cool. So is the thesis project and the studio project separate completely?
Yeah, they're separate. And you don't have to do a thesis in the architecture department. It's optional. But if you do want to do it, you can kind of, pave your own way and talk to the advisors and figure out what you want to do. Sometimes that looks like a research thesis. Sometimes that's a design thesis. And you can kind of create your own project, which is nice. I'll be doing my thesis more on the history and research side of architecture. And I'll be researching zoo architecture and its histories with colonialism and kind of the construction of human identity through animals and architectures along the boundary of that human animal line. So definitely excited for that. I've done quite a bit of research in the past for different classes for that project already. And so I'm excited to kind of culminate it into one final piece of writing.
That's awesome. That is so cool. And that would be something that would that be intertwined in like a potential grad degree in landscape architecture that you were talking about before?
Maybe, maybe not. I might end up pursuing like a Fulbright research opportunity, continuing to study zoo architecture in a different country, because this thesis will probably focus on American zoo architecture. But as of now, I don't have solid plans to go to grad school. I want to get a couple of years of work experience under my belt and then maybe go back to school.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Nice.
Subject to change, of course.
Yeah. And talking about we spoke about the senior year structure of the architecture program. So what do the first 3 years typically look like? How many classes are required, and is there any electives that you can choose?
Yeah, of course. So the architecture major, along with most majors at Columbia, I think are meant to be started sophomore year, but you can definitely come in as a freshman and start right away if you want. But you'll start out doing a studio each semester as you move up. And then along with the required studio classes, you also have history theory requirements. The structure of the classes and the requirements have kind of changed since I started out. So it's a little different, and some of the terminology might be different if you look on the website now or start studying architecture next year. But for the most part, there, I think, are 5 history theory class requirements. And some of those you can take in the art history department, looking at like art and architecture history. Some of them are more architecture focused. We often have classes about like architecture and environmentalism or architecture and digital space. So lots of cool classes you can take for the major, within the major. And then in addition, we have what's called a cluster. And so you have to pick 3 related courses that are slightly related to architecture, sometimes more or less related to architecture. But the idea is that you kind of specialize in one topic, and then you bring that knowledge to your final senior seminar. Mm-hmm. So some people do, classes about New York City in the urban studies department and the history department, and their cluster ends up being, New York City history or New York City architecture. I have a friend who's doing a cluster related to dance and movement in architecture. People do stuff about environmentalism. And of course, mine, as I mentioned before, is about human animal and architecture spaces. So lots of freedom within the department to kind of choose your own specific niche area of study.
It sounds very fun in that you get to learn about a lot of diverse fields, not only through your own research, but then also learning about other people's projects within the department. Yeah, it's cool. I think the cool thing about Columbia in general is that you have the time to explore things other than just your major. And so people are bringing
new approaches and new discussions into my architecture classes all the time. And it's never just about the building. It's about, it brings in sociology and anthropology and history and race studies and other critical theory. And so it's really cool to have those conversations and to be immersed in such an interdisciplinary discussion.
Sounds like a close-knit group too, I feel. I don't know if that's correct. I don't know how big the major is, but
yeah, no, it is. It's definitely a close-knit group. The major is not that big. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes how big the architecture major is because some people are concentrating or minoring. If you're in Barnard, you can minor in architecture. And some people are just taking studios for fun. And then some of us are majoring in architecture. Nice. So it's hard to tell, but it's definitely a close-knit group. And most of the time, you kind of take studio classes with the same group of people because you're all on the same schedule. And so you get close with people in your studio throughout the years.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that going into the architecture major or minor, do you need a background in art, or can you start off kind of just like fresh, clean slate?
Yeah, no, of course you can start off fresh. I think the people who start off fresh have the coolest ideas because they're bringing in a different background to the subject. So yeah, you don't need an architecture background at all. I didn't have one. I had an arts background, so I knew how to draw, I knew how to paint, but I didn't really know how to think about space in 3D. And so it was cool to learn how to design in 3D and how to think about space like that in a new way. And I felt like it gave me new rules to break. So it was cool to kind of switch up my creative process. And yeah, I don't know, it's different and it's similar to the artistic process, but there's so many more things to think about. You have to do your site research, and I always interview people, and you have to think about the space and how your project will kind of interact with so many different other things than just hanging on the wall, being in a gallery. So yeah. I really liked the switch for that reason.
Oh yeah. Does that mean 3D designing? Is that a lot of like software or like computer work?
It is, yeah. Most of the program nowadays is digital. Mm-hmm. You still, you start out by sketching, and then you also learn, the base techniques for hand sketching, plan drawings and diagrams. But most of the work is digital. And that's been another cool thing too. Even if I don't want to go into a career in architecture, I still have all the design tools to go into a variety of other fields. I've learned Photoshop and Illustrator and a couple other programs in Adobe Suite, and then also 3D modeling programs. We use Rhino 3D at Columbia and AutoCAD. And then, there are opportunities to weave in other software for your projects. And so you definitely get those skills, but you don't need to come to Columbia with those skills already established.
Mm-hmm. And what have been some of your favorite projects that you've done, either for class or for outside of class?
Yeah, I've done a lot of cool projects. I've built a city for termites and an installation of light and ocular centrism and a machine for biodiversity. So a lot of cool stuff. And then in addition to kind of the more eccentric projects, I've designed like a climate museum and like a water playground and kayak launch. So those have been some of my favorite studio projects. I guess outside of studio, I do a lot of set design. So that's been another fun creative outlet. Since we don't often or ever build the buildings that we design in studio, set design has been a fun way for me to design a space and then see it built in person and see it come to life. And so those have been some of my favorite projects as well.
Whoa, that is so cool. Wait, those like the ones that the names of the projects that you mentioned, the last one was what, a kayak launcher?
Kayak launch, yes. Oh. Not a launcher, I guess, but a way to get kayaks in and out of the water in 𝐏𝐿HCOVE in Queens, yes. So not quite as fun as a kayak launcher, although I guess it did launch the kayaks into the water somehow.
Is that why you had to go on the kayaking trip with your class?
Yes.
Oh, gotcha.
We had to learn how to kayak, and we had to learn how the kayaks got in and out of the water. Oh. That was definitely a fun project. I had fun with that one.
I never knew that architecture was so interactive. Like you have to really understand, like you were saying, like understand the space and how everything works and like the motion of everything and interactions with people too, which I think is
I think a lot of the times people look at architecture as an object. If you design a building without keeping the space in mind, you're just designing an object. You're not designing a space. And so in order to design a space that's actually going to be effective or compelling, you need to think about all these other things. You need to think about like who's going to be interacting with it, and how are they going to interact with it, and what does the community want out of a structure in their vicinity. And so lots of different things you have to think about when you're designing a building or a space or an installation.
So when you talked about interviewing people, did you mean like talking to the community members, like for example, how they felt about that piece of architecture or what they expected from it?
Yeah. I'm concentrating in anthropology. And so I definitely pro interviewing people and talking to the community. And I did one project. It was a memory bank or a memorial for memories down in Sarah D. Roosevelt Park in Lower Manhattan. And I spent an afternoon interviewing homeless people in the park who kind of occupied that space during the day, and gathering stories and their memories of the park, and then using those stories to inform the design, and then create this installation to archive these memories and store them almost as a time capsule. So that was a really cool project because I really got to know the area through the people that inhabited it the most, and I felt like my end design really reflected that, and was so strong because I had spent time talking to the people in the community.
I'm just trying to envision like what it would look like. How did you go about representing the memories?
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily representing the memories, but more creating a space to share them and then collect them. And so the whole idea was that the space could be transformed by the visitors. And so it didn't have a solid form, but could expand and contract and open and close depending on the memory being shared. And if you wanted a private or a public conversation, or if you wanted different sight lines to different areas of the park. And I think the title of the project was Anti-Memorial Memory Bank, kind of playing with the idea that a memorial is usually meant to memorialize a single thing, but this was a memorial to everyone's memories, and everyone's memories are different. And so creating a temporary transformable space for those memories to be shared.
Oh, that's so cool. Right, because we think of like memorials as something that is more permanent and that is not really shifting, or maybe like not transforming with the times. But yeah, this is really cool. That sounds really
cool. Yeah, it was a cool project.
And how about not over the academic year, but how about going into the summers? What have you been doing? Have you been working on any summer projects or jobs or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a fun transition talking about memorials, because I had the opportunity in 2019 to work with the American Battle Monuments Commission on site at a World War I and World War II cemetery in Paris. And so that was a really cool opportunity. I got to work on site at a memorial and think about the ways visitors interacted with the space and do research on the soldiers that were buried there. And so that was a really cool opportunity. I did a lot of Excel spreadsheets and photos and background research, but to spend the time in that revered space was a really special moment. And another plug for the Columbia Career Center, I got completely funded to do that. And so I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. It was an unpaid internship through the government, but I got funding, both a stipend for what I would have made if it was a paid opportunity, and a scholarship for living expenses in Paris. And so I got to spend 2 months there, working, living, having a great time.
That is so cool. Wait, do you speak the language, or was it
I speak a bit of French. I took French in high school and then 1 semester of French in college, but I was working for Americans. So my French did not really improve greatly in, in the work sense, but I grew my French skills in ordering items at a restaurant and going to the grocery store and small talk when at my regular cafe, and just making friends around. So the French got a little better, but not not a lot. But I was able to survive. It was fun.
That's awesome. And was that your first? Wait, I'm trying to think. Did you?
That was, let's see.
Yeah,
that was, I guess, sophomore summer. Other than that, I worked in an art gallery and rented kayaks, and now doing this graphic design role. So all over the place. I haven't done any, architecture specific internships, but I don't necessarily want to go into architecture. And so I haven't felt the need to pursue those architecture internships, but rather spend the time, doing other things and gaining experience among a variety of fields and having fun along the way.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what do you think is a characteristic, or I guess a set of characteristics that architects should have in general?
Yeah, I think you got to have creativity. You got to be able to think out of the box and push the boundaries of what architecture to be. I also think it's really important to be collaborative. As much fun as it is to develop an idea on your own, I feel like the best ideas are always developed by a group of people, whether that's, getting feedback from your classmates or your professors, or actually working on projects together and being able to collaborate to bring an idea to life. And so being able to collaborate in a creative setting, I think, is a really good strength to have when you're pursuing architecture, but also any artistic degree.
I remember in Art Home, we had this discussion of whether, this was a discussion board that we had to post on. It was like, is architecture considered art, and why? And I think they were split between yes, because it requires creativity, all the processes that and design and engineering and building everything that is artistic, but then also there's a separate group of people who thought that it wasn't, because it was more practical in a way. But then so I feel like that's two separate, or maybe they could coexisting mindsets.
Yeah, I think what is art is an impossible question to answer. I think I've been able to channel art through studying architecture, and think about art in a spatial sense, and what is architecture and what is an art installation, and you can kind of think about those things as intertwining. And I think even I guess real building projects do have design, and you have to think artistically in order to create something that's appealing. But it is a fine line. People like to distinguish design from art and craft from art and craft from design, but there are so many boundaries that can be blurred. So I think it's hard to distinguish them and give each a separate definition.
Definitely, I agree. Let's see. And what about, since you are well traveled around New York City, what are some fun places to visit, or what are some fun things to experience when you're in the city? Yeah,
I'll give you my second trip to New York experiences that I like to tell people. The first time you come, you go to the Met, you go to the MoMA, you go to the Empire State Building. But I really like sending people to some of the lesser known areas. I think my favorite place in New York City is Governor's Island. It's right off the coast of Manhattan, and it's just this idyllic place. It's historic because it used to be an army base, and there are these colonial style buildings, but it's also full of contemporary landscape architecture, and there's a hill with slides, and there's a hammock yard and art installations. And it's a really cool space, and it's only open to foot traffic, so no cars. You take a 10-minute ferry from Manhattan over, and can rent bikes, walk around, see the Statue of Liberty, see the skyline. So that's definitely my favorite place in New York City. I also love, Prospect Park. Central Park is great, but Prospect Park is really cool too. It's the other Olmsted Park in the city, and it's it's cool. It has a pond and big open fields, and you feel a little less like you're smack dab in the middle of the city. And so I like to go there and rent bikes and bike around. And yeah, I walk everywhere. So I do a lot of exploring, walking from neighborhood to neighborhood, admiring the architecture, and also just admiring the bookstores and the food especially. So I've definitely had a lot of time to do exploring.
Yeah, for sure. And what about something only a Columbia student would know based on your experiences, and also maybe a favorite Columbia tradition?
Okay, let's see. Something only a Columbia student would know. Well, I guess the nice thing about Columbia is that we have the core, I guess in Columbia College, we have the core curriculum. And so everyone has these shared experiences that other people may not have. So I guess only a Columbia student would know what the inside of the walls of St. John the Divine look like, which is our cathedral. And I guess they're open to the public if you take a tour, but that was one of my favorite memories of Columbia, I guess, and the core in general, was taking a tour of St. John the Divine, which is our cathedral right down the road, and going inside the walls and up to the roof. And that was a really cool experience. And I don't think very many people get to experience that. I guess favorite traditions on campus, definitely the tree lighting ceremony, which I'm sure other guests have said, but it's just the perfect tradition, comes at the perfect time right before you get finals started, and get to come together, take the iconic profile picture with the lights in the background, and share hot chocolate. I think in addition to that, and in addition to the Columbia-wide traditions, I think some of my favorite memories too are the traditions that I've created with my friends. And, the things we do every year, we go apple picking, or we go to our favorite Czech restaurant in Queens. And these traditions that we've established and continue to do year after year have been some of my favorite memories.
That's so sweet. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but are there a lot of people in your year who have chosen to take gap years? And the reason I'm asking is I'm just wondering if any of your friends are also sticking around for.
Yeah, a few of my friends are. I don't know how many people took gap years. I think originally I thought it was more than who actually did, but definitely more than usual because of COVID, but not a disproportionate amount of people. But I'm excited to, come back. I'll miss my friends in studio and, the friends I kind of did college with, but I'm excited to meet some new people in your class, get to know some new faces, and
that's true.
Reconnect.
That's so fun. Are you going to be in OL again this year?
I am not, unfortunately. I was in OL last year and then decided to take a gap year, and then felt bad, leaving my students and passing them on to someone else. So I guess this could have been my opportunity to be a 5th year orientation leader. But I decided against that. But I'll still be around. I love NSOP and that orientation week, another fun tradition.
Yeah.
And so definitely come say hi or hop on some of the tours that go downtown.
I think that is a great note to end off on. And maybe if there's anything else that you want to talk about, or if you have any pieces of advice for people who are applying to college or who are about to enter their first year of college.
Yeah. I think I'm a tour guide, so I tell this at the end of my tours, but, I almost didn't apply to Columbia because I never thought I'd get in. And then I almost didn't come because I didn't think I'd fit in. And I didn't think I had enough of a rigorous academic background to be successful here. But, I've been challenged, I've been successful, I've met incredible friends, I've had fun too. And I think, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to go to school in New York City, go to a school like Columbia. And I've grown so much, both in self-confidence and creative confidence. And so I'm really thankful for my time here and excited to have one more year before I graduate. Very thankful for my time here. I guess, I do have a project to plug if you don't mind. If there are any designers or artists or viewers out there that want to join a design project I'm doing, it's called Exquisite Chaise, and it's based off of the game Exquisite Corpse, where someone draws a head, someone draws a torso, someone draws the feet. But instead of drawing a monster or a figure or a creature, I'm designing chairs. And so you can submit a chair and then be randomly paired with another designer who's also designed a chair, and your chair top will be paired with their chair bottom and vice versa. And the archive of all the designs is on a website. I'm sure you can link it below.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
I'll send that over to you. And you can also find it at Exquisite Chaise on Instagram. So would love to have some of your viewers join in the fun.
Yeah, that sounds so awesome. It will definitely be in the description below if you guys are interested. Be sure to check it out. And yeah, just thank you, Kristian, for being here. I had such a good time talking to you, and I learned so much. Actually, I didn't realize I didn't know all this before talking to you, and now I have learned. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad I was able to share some of my knowledge about the department and my time at Columbia, and it was so great to catch up.
Yeah, and thank you to our viewers too. And if you're watching this on YouTube as a video podcast, make sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe and comment down below. And if you're listening to this on any other podcast streaming platform, then make sure to hit the thumbs up and follow if you can. And yeah, thank you everyone again, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you. See ya.